Hi, and welcome back to the Tarot Card Catalogue, the show where we take one tarot card and one story from somewhere in human history and let them mess with each other's meaning for a while. Today's card is Death. Card number 13, the one that makes people flinch a little when it turns up in a spread, or flinch a lot. And even people who've been doing this a long time feel intimidated at the appearance of this card. The story I want to put next to it is Baba Yaga, specifically the version of her that isn't a monster in a fairy tale, but something more like a border guard for children who wander too far from home. I'm not going to tell you yet what these two have in common. I just want you to hold on to the image of a hut that turns around to face you, and we'll get there. So let's start where everybody starts, which is the guidebook version of death. You pull this card, and the picture in most decks is some variation on a skeleton in armor riding a pale horse, moving slowly through a landscape where things are already falling. A king lying on the ground, a child looking up, maybe a tower or a river in the background. And the guidebooks will tell you this is not usually about literal death. Most tarot readers will say that fast, almost defensively, because people panic. They'll tell you it's about endings, transitions, the closing of one chapter so another can open, release, letting go of what no longer serves you. You've heard that phrase, I'm sure, if you've spent any time around this stuff. And there's truth in that. Death sits in the suit of Major Arcana that deals with big impersonal forces. Fortune, Judgment, the Tower, the cards that don't ask your permission before they act. Death is often read as the most honest card in the deck, actually, because it doesn't negotiate. It's not the devil tempting you. It's not the hanged man inviting you to pause and reconsider. Death just arrives. And whatever it touches doesn't get to stay the same afterward. There's a stripping down quality to it. Bones showing through, structure revealed once the soft tissue of a situation is gone. Emotionally, this card tends to land in one of two ways depending on where someone's standing in their life. If you're mid-crisis, divorce or job loss or a diagnosis, a move you didn't choose, death can almost feel like a relief when it shows up in a reading because it says, yes, this is real. This is actually ending. You're not imagining it. But if you're someone clinging to a version of yourself that you're not ready to lose, death feels like a threat. It feels like being told the floor's about to disappear and there's nothing you can do about the timing. And I want to sit with that phrase for a second. Nothing you can do about the timing. Because that's actually the part of death's traditional meaning that I think gets flattened the most. We talk about death as transformation, which sounds gentle, almost inspirational. Caterpillar to butterfly, all that. But transformation implies you're the one driving. Death traditionally is not really asking you to transform. It's informing you that transformation is already underway with or without your consent. And your only real choice is whether you cooperate with what's already happening to you. Which is a much scarier card than the butterfly version, honestly. And it's exactly the kind of scary that made me think of an old woman in the middle of a forest in her hut who doesn't care if you're 12 years old and terrified. So, Baba Yaga. If you didn't grow up with her, here's the shape of it. And I want to be upfront that there isn't one canonical Baba Yaga story. She shows up across Russian, Ukrainian, Belarusian, and broader Slavic folklore in dozens of versions. Sometimes as one hag, sometimes as three sisters sharing the name, sometimes helpful, sometimes lethal, sometimes both in the same telling. Scholars still argue about where she comes from, some kind of ancient forest deity, some say, worn down over centuries into a fairy tale villain. But that's a theory, not a settled fact. What I'm giving you is the pattern that shows up again and again, the one most people mean when they say her name. There's a girl, often a stepdaughter, unwanted in the house, a cruel stepmother running things, sometimes a weak father who doesn't intervene. This girl is sent on some errand, usually needle and thread, or fire, something the household supposedly can't survive without, heads into the forest. And the forest in this kind of story is never just trees. It's the edge of the known world. It's where the rules of the house stop applying. She walks, this young girl. The trees get closer together. The light changes. Can't you feel the drama? And eventually she comes to a fence made of bones, topped with skulls that glow like little lanterns at night. And inside that fence is a hut standing on chicken legs, and the hut turns. It spins to face her like it already knew someone was coming and has been waiting, in no hurry at all for the introduction. And she has to say the words. There's a specific request in a lot of versions, something like, turn your back to the forest and your front to me. And if she gets it right, the hut turns and the door opens, and there is Baba Yaga. Old, iron teeth in some tellings, a nose that nearly touches the ceiling. She travels through the sky in a mortar, using the pestle as a rudder, sweeping her tracks away behind her with a broom made of birch. And when the girl arrives, hungry, exhausted, and alone, Baba Yaga does not comfort her. She doesn't ask if she's okay. She looks her over like livestock and says something to the effect of, "You may stay if you're useful." And then she gives her tasks. Impossible ones. Spin this impossible amount of flax by morning. Cook a meal for me from an empty larder. Separate poppy seeds from a mountain of dirt before the sun rises. Sometimes with the implication, spoken or not, that failure means she becomes the next meal. Here's where I think this story gets unfairly compressed when people tell it to kids as a straightforward cautionary tale. Because the girl doesn't survive by being brave in the sword fighting sense. She survives because somewhere on the way into that forest, or sometimes inside the hut itself, she was kind to something small. She fed a starving cat. She oiled a rusted gate hinge instead of walking past it. She gave a ribbon to a birch tree, tied a bow around a fence post, was gentle to a servant hand that reached out of nowhere to help. And those small things she noticed, the things a crueler, more hurried person would have ignored, come back to help her when the tasks look impossible. The cat feeds her the truth. The gate lets her through quietly. The ribbon distracts Baba Yaga's fence for just long enough. She isn't rewarded for confronting Baba Yaga. She's rewarded for paying attention in a place where her old habits of politeness and expectation stopped meaning anything. And that, I think, is the hinge this whole episode turns on. Because when you're standing in front of that hut as a kid, and I mean the actual child sent by an actual cruel household, but also the child self in all of us, the part that still believes the rules of home apply everywhere, Baba Yaga is not testing your goodness. She's testing whether you can put down the child's assumption that safety is guaranteed, that kindness will be recognized and rewarded on the terms you expect, that adults in charge will explain themselves. She offers none of that. She's not going to tell you why the tasks matter. She's not going to promise you you'll survive if you try hard. She simply is the forest's law, embodied, and the only way through her is to stop being the child who needed the old rules to be true. That is death. That's exactly death's job, if you think about it sideways for a second. Death doesn't explain itself either. It doesn't reward you for having been good under the old system. It's not interested in your grief for the life you had. The card doesn't care that you're scared the way Baba Yaga doesn't care that the girl is 12 and shaking. What both of them are actually doing, and this is the thing I want to leave sitting in the middle of the room for the rest of this episode, is refusing to let the old self walk through carrying its old rule book. The hut turns around. It will not face you until you stop addressing the forest like it's still your mother's kitchen. Death, the card, works the same way. It doesn't take your life from you most of the time. Tarot readers will tell you that till they're blue in the face. It's rarely literal. What it takes is your ability to keep operating on assumptions that used to work in a life that's already over. The threshold is intelligent. It's not cruelty for its own sake. It's cruelty with a shape, a design, a filter built into it. And the filter is this: you don't get to bring your old self through the door. That is the insight. Not endings are scary. Everyone knows that. Not change is hard, because sure. It's that the fear people feel around death and around thresholds like Baba Yaga's hut isn't really fear of loss. It's the much more specific, much more disorienting fear of arriving somewhere that has its own laws that have nothing to do with who you were on the other side of the fence. So if we let Baba Yaga sit next to death for a while, some of the traditional keywords start to feel thin and some new ones start to feel truer. Endings become something more like the end of being able to remain unchanged, because the girl in the story doesn't die, not literally. Most versions send her home again. But she comes home different, having left her childish assumptions in the forest, whether she wanted to or not. Release becomes initiation through surrender, not the graceful kind of surrender you choose on a nice morning with tea, but the kind you're forced into when the only other option is starving in front of a hut that won't stop turning away from you. And transformation, that soft butterfly word, becomes something closer to the threshold that refuses your old rules, which is a much less comfortable phrase, but I think it's more honest about what the card and the story are actually describing. Here's the one thing I'll leave you with, and I mean just this one. Next time death turns up in a spread, or next time you feel that specific vertigo of being somewhere your old habits clearly don't work anymore, ask yourself what rule you're still trying to bring through the door that the place on the other side has already made obsolete. So that's the episode. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, Death, and Baba Yaga, an old woman in a hut nobody asked to visit. I'm Danielle, and if you'd like to explore mythology, storytelling, and tarot with me more deeply, I offer readings, courses, and mentorship through Sibyl's Lab. The link will be in the description. Until next time, I hope you remember that the forest has its own rules, and that when the hut turns to face you, you can still pay attention. Thank you.